Lena had worked in the hotel for almost a year, and by now she knew every sound that filled the lobby each afternoon. The clinking of teacups, the soft chatter of guests, the rolling suitcase wheels, and of course, the bright echo of the grand piano that stood near the window wall. Most days, no one touched it. It was more of a decoration than an instrument, a polished centerpiece that guests simply took photos beside. But today, something felt different. Even before anything actually happened, it was mid-afternoon when she stepped out from the staff corridor, carrying a tray with empty glasses. The lobby was busier than usual with a group of travelers who had just arrived from a long flight. Their energy filled the room, and although most of them looked tired, some seemed excited, whispering and pointing at various parts of the hotel, as if exploring a new world. Lena smiled softly as she walked past them, careful not to bump into anyone. She placed the tray behind the counter and returned to wipe a few tables as she moved around. She looked out of the corner of her eye at the grand piano. It still shined as if it had been polished that morning, though she knew nobody had touched it since yesterday. Sometimes, when the lobby was empty late at night, she would walk past it slowly, almost expecting it to call her name. She had grown up with music, but the piano had become a distant memory in her adult life. She tried not to look at it too often because each time she did, she felt a small echo reminder of something she once loved, but could no longer hold on to. She turned away and began picking up the leftover napkins from one of the tables. Everything was routine, everything predictable, and she thought the day would be just another ordinary one, until a sudden burst of laughter filled the lobby. A group of 4 guests had gathered near the piano. They looked like business travelers, judging by their suitcases and jackets. One of them, a tall man with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, seemed particularly lively. He tapped the piano keys with one finger, making a random, high-pitched sound that echoed across the lobby. His friends laughed again, not at the note itself, but at the way he played it like a child pressing buttons on a toy. Lena kept cleaning, trying not to stare, but she could hear every word they spoke. "Come on, try playing something," one of the women in the group said as she nudged the tall man. He shook his head quickly. "I can play, but someone here must know a simple tune." He looked around the lobby, scanning the room for any volunteers. Most guests just smiled politely or shook their heads. Some pretended not to notice. The man tapped the keys again, this time trying to play a chord, but it came out messy and uneven. The group laughed louder, and even Lena couldn't help but smile quietly at that moment. The tall man's eyes met hers. He lifted his eyebrows in a playful way. "What about you?" he called out across the room. Lena froze for a second, not sure he actually meant her. She glanced behind her to double-check, but there was no one else close enough. She placed the napkins down and straightened her posture, feeling her heart skip one beat, then 2. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes, you," he said with a grin. "You work here, right? Do you know how to play even a little?" His tone was light and friendly, nothing rude or mocking, but the question still made her stomach twist. She suddenly felt as if everyone in the lobby was looking at her, even though many weren't. She hadn't played for so long, and even though she knew she had once been good, maybe even very good, she didn't consider herself a pianist anymore. Life had moved in another direction. She no longer had the luxury to sit for hours practicing keys and melodies. "I used to," she said quietly. "A long time ago," the woman from the group smiled warmly. "Then show us something small. Just a short melody." Lena shook her head gently. "I don't think—" "Oh, come on," the tall man said before she could finish. "Nothing fancy. Just something simple. A basic tune. We just want to hear the piano come alive." He wasn't pushing her out of arrogance. His smile was easy, almost encouraging, and she didn't sense any bad intention. But still, she wasn't comfortable. She wasn't ready, not without warning, and not in front of strangers who expected nothing more than a tiny tune they could clap politely for. But then something unexpected happened. An older couple sitting near the window looked over. The woman raised her hand and called out gently, "Let the girl play." "If she wants to, of course." The man beside her nodded. "It's been a while since we heard anyone touch that piano." Other guests began turning in their seats, not staring, but curious enough to pay attention. And in the middle of all that, Lena suddenly felt a small warmth in her chest. It was the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement she used to feel years ago when her teacher would ask her to play in front of a small audience. Back then, she would take a deep breath, place her fingers on the keys, and let her heart guide her. Now, it felt like a ghost of that old feeling was waking up inside her. She didn't want to give a performance. She didn't want to show off. She didn't even want to impress the strangers. But something inside her whispered quietly. It's almost like a gentle nudge. Just try. She took one small breath and walked slowly toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of the memories that rose with them. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept going until she reached the bench. The tall man stepped aside respectfully, giving her space. "Only if you're okay with it," he said softly. She nodded once. A small, unsure nod, but still a yes. When she sat down on the bench, the smooth surface of the piano felt almost familiar, as if it remembered her. She placed her hands on her lap first, afraid to touch the keys too soon. The group of business travelers watched with a gentle anticipation, and some guests from across the room leaned forward slightly. No one was talking now. The usual chatter of the lobby had softened, as if the walls themselves were waiting. Her breath steadied. She could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of a suitcase wheel rolling across the floor, and the soft rustle of clothing as people shifted their positions. She lifted her hands finally and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. She didn't know what to play. She hadn't even thought that far. But her fingers settled naturally near the middle range, right where most beginners learn their first melodies. She pressed a single key, and the sound floated through the lobby, gentle, clean, and crisp. The piano was well maintained. Its tone carried warmth. She exhaled slowly. The tall man gave her a small thumb-up gesture from the side. But she kept her eyes on the keys. She wasn't playing for him. She wasn't playing for the guests. She was playing for herself, for the part of her that still remembered what music felt like. She began with a simple scale, the kind she learned when she was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. The notes rose and fell smoothly, not rushed, not shaky, but calm and steady. The group nodded approvingly, probably thinking this was all she would do. Maybe even Lena herself believed that. But as she moved through the scale, her finger brushed over a note that reminded her of an old song she used to love. A piece she used to play late at night when she thought no one was listening. The memory hit her unexpectedly, and she paused for a moment. Her heart tugged gently. She hadn't played that song in years. She didn't even remember every part of it. But the first few notes, she remembered those. Her hands shifted slightly. Almost without conscious thought, she played a short phrase, soft, delicate, like a whisper from the past. The lobby grew even quieter. One of the women in the business group gasped softly. Another leaned closer, elbows resting on the piano's edge. Even people who weren't paying attention before now turned toward her. Lena felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't trying to impress them. She wasn't trying to show skill. She was just letting a memory speak through her fingers. She returned to the scale for a moment, trying to keep things simple, just as they had asked. She didn't trust herself to go further, not yet. But something inside her was shifting. Something that had been buried under work schedules, bills, responsibilities, and routines. Something that was gently waking, stretching, remembering who she used to be. She played one more short phrase from the old melody. This time, it came out smoother, more confident, as if her hands were guiding her instead of the other way around. The guests exchanged glances, clearly noticing the difference between a basic tune and what she had just played. The tall man smiled again. But this time, it wasn't playful. It was something closer to admiration. Lena could feel her heartbeat rising, but not from fear now. From possibility. She wasn't sure what she was about to play next. She didn't know if she should stop or continue. Part of her wanted to run back to the counter and pretend the moment never happened. But another part, the part she had, silenced for so long, was gently urging her forward. The piano keys felt warm under her fingertips. The room felt still, almost expectant. Even the light coming through the tall windows seemed softer, as if waiting for her next move. And somewhere inside her, The small spark that music had always lit began to glow again, faint but steady. That was the moment, the quiet, delicate moment, before everything would change. But at that point, Lena had no idea how much one simple request would stir inside her. All she knew was that the piano was no longer just a decoration, and she was no longer just a waitress passing by. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone who still had something beautiful hidden within her, waiting to be heard. And as she kept her fingers resting lightly on the keys, she felt the faintest hint of courage. She wasn't done yet. Lena kept her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, unsure what to play next. The scale she had started with felt too small now, too empty after the little hint of melody she had allowed to slip through. She could sense the quiet attention around her, not pressure, not judgment, just curiosity. It was the kind of silence that gently encouraged instead of pushed. She didn't feel trapped, but she didn't feel completely free either. She was somewhere in between, sitting on the edge of an old memory that she wasn't sure she was ready to revisit. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. She curled her fingers, letting her nails brush over the tops of the keys without pressing them. She needed a moment to breathe. So she took one long, calm breath and let her chest settle before she tried again. The older couple near the window gave her a warm, approving smile. The woman's eyes were soft, filled with kindness rather than expectation. The man gave a small nod, almost like telling her it was okay to take her time. Small gesture helped more than anyone realized. Lena pressed a single key again, not starting a melody, just reminding herself of the instrument's voice. The sound rang clear and smooth. She followed it with another note, then another, not a song, just scattered tones. But each one loosened. Something inside her, something tight that had stayed locked for far too long. A part of her wanted to stand up and leave the moment behind. She was just a hotel worker after all. She wasn't someone people expected a performance from. But another part, a much quieter one, whispered that maybe this was her chance to reconnect with something she had lost. Not for the audience, not for applause, but for herself. She remembered the old piano her family once had, a small, upright piece of furniture that barely stayed in tune. The keys had yellowed edges, and some of them made soft clicking sounds when pressed. But she had loved it. She had loved every imperfect detail of it. Her fingers had danced over it for hours, even when she didn't know what she was doing. Music had been her way of talking when she didn't know how to express herself. Her teacher used to tell her that some people played for success, some for fun, but Lena played because her emotions needed somewhere to go. As she sat there now, that same feeling began to stir again. She placed her left hand lower on the keyboard and played a quiet, gentle chord. It wasn't anything complicated, just a soft foundation, but the sound felt like a doorway opening. Her right hand followed with a few light notes, unsure at first, but slowly finding a small rhythm. The travelers who had encouraged her earlier leaned closer. They weren't loud anymore. The lively energy they carried when they first arrived had settled into a respectful stillness. One of them pulled out a phone, probably to record, but he hesitated, as if afraid of breaking the mood. Instead, he quietly set the phone down and watched with genuine interest. Lena didn't notice any of that. She was focused on the piano, on the way the sound vibrated beneath her fingertips. She took another breath as she let the small rhythm guide her into something that felt like the beginning of a song. It wasn't the old piece she remembered earlier, not exactly. It was something softer, slower, made up of fragmented memories stitched together with the emotions rising in her chest. Her shoulders relaxed, just a little, breathing smoothed out. She let her hands wander carefully, unsure of where they would lead, but trusting them enough to try. In the back of her mind, she heard her old teacher's voice, a gentle, encouraging tone she hadn't heard in years. "Don't think too much," he used to say. "Let your heart speak first, then your hands will follow." She smiled faintly at the memory. The song grew slightly fuller, the notes floating across the lobby like tiny ripples on water. The guests, scattered around the room, started to listen quietly, some turning their chairs so they could see her better. A few children nearby stopped playing with their toys and looked toward the piano, drawn in by the pretty sound. Even the staff at the reception desk glanced over, surprised and impressed. Lena tried not to think about them, the attention made her nervous, and she didn't want the pressure to ruin what she was slowly building. So she kept her eyes on the keys and allowed herself to sink into the moment. She wasn't performing, she was remembering. Remembering what it felt like to create something beautiful, even if it wasn't perfect. Remembering what it felt like to let her emotions move through sound instead of words. As she played, more memories surfaced, not just of her childhood, but of the years that followed. She thought of the day her family sold their upright piano because they couldn't afford space for it. She remembered trying to practice on electronic keyboards at school, their plastic keys never matching the warmth of real wood. She remembered staying late after classes to learn more pieces, hoping no one would turn the lights off before she finished. And most painful of all, she remembered the day she finally let go of her dream of studying music professionally because life had other plans. Those memories were bittersweet, but as she played, she realized something she had forgotten. The dream hadn't died, it had only been buried. Buried under responsibility, under routine, under the belief that she wasn't allowed to hope anymore. The sound of the piano now felt like uncovering that dream bit by bit. Her fingers began to gain confidence. The melody became smoother, as if her hands remembered the patterns even when her mind couldn't. She let her left hand add gentle chords, while her right hand created soft movements that blended together like a quiet conversation. The tall traveler from earlier whispered to his friend, "She's really good," but the words didn't reach Lena's ears. She was absorbed in the rising warmth of the music. Every note made her feel more alive, as if she were reconnecting with a version of herself she thought she had lost forever. Then, just as she felt comfortable enough to continue into a deeper part of the melody, something inside her snapped back to reality. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the sudden realization that she was still sitting in a hotel lobby, surrounded by people who were watching her every move. Her hands hesitated. The melody faltered for a moment. She felt her heart stumble in her chest. The older woman near the window noticed. She leaned forward just a bit and spoke in a quiet voice that carried across the lobby, gentle and reassuring. "It's beautiful. Keep going if you want to." The man beside her nodded, adding, "You're doing wonderful, young lady." Those simple words steadied Lena in a way she didn't expect. She looked at the older couple and offered a small smile before turning her gaze back to the piano. Her hands lowered again, and she played another chord soft. But steady, she continued, gradually easing back into the melody. The hesitation faded, replaced by a slow-burning confidence that grew with each note she played. Not the loud, showy kind of confidence that performers use to draw applause, but a quiet kind that came from rediscovering a part of herself. The lobby now felt like a warm cocoon of sound. The chatter had disappeared completely. Even the staff members pretended to be busy while sneaking glances at the piano. A child sat with his chin resting on the table, eyes wide, completely mesmerized by the music. A young couple held hands, listening quietly. Group of friends near the corner stopped talking mid-sentence as the notes carried across the room. Lena didn't aim to impress them. She wasn't trying to be flawless. She simply played because something within her told her she needed to. And that made the music feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. After several minutes, she slowed the melody, letting it drift softly like a fading sunset. The final notes lingered in the air before disappearing completely. For a moment, the lobby was perfectly still. No one moved, no one breathed loudly. It was a short, peaceful silence, one that felt like the world had paused. Just long enough to let the moment settle into everyone's hearts. Lena kept her hands on the keys, not pressing down, just resting them gently. She wasn't sure what to do next. Stand up? Play more? Apologize for taking too long? She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and nervousness began to creep back into her chest. Then someone clapped, not loudly, not forcefully, just a soft, genuine clap. Another person joined, then another. And soon the entire lobby was applauding, not with the energy of a show crowd, but with the warmth of people who had truly appreciated something honest and unexpected. Lena looked down, her cheeks flushing red. She felt shy, almost embarrassed, but also strangely happy. She had brought a rare moment of connection to a room full of strangers. And that realization filled her with quiet pride. The tall traveler approached with a softer expression than before. "That was incredible," he said sincerely. We only asked for a simple tune, but you gave us something so much more. Lena shook her head lightly. It wasn't much, just something small. The woman in his group stepped closer. It didn't feel small, she said with a smile. It felt real. Those words hit Lena deeper than she expected. Real. That was what she had been missing in her life lately. The sense that she was doing something. Something from the heart. She stood up slowly from the bench. Her legs felt a little weak, like she had just run a long distance, not physically, but emotionally. She brushed her hands lightly on her work apron, unsure how to act next. Part of her wanted to hide in the staff hallway until the heat in her cheeks faded. But she also felt a little lighter, a little brighter, as if a weight she didn't even know she carried had lifted. Before she could leave, the older woman near the window called out, "Thank you, dear. That was lovely." Lena nodded politely. "Thank you for listening." She stepped away from the piano, her heart still fluttering. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she could or should play again. All she knew was that something inside her had shifted. Something small, but important. A seed breaking through soil, a flicker of courage, warming old ashes, and she had no idea that this small beginning was only the start of something much bigger. Lena walked away from the piano slowly, almost afraid to look back at it. Her heart was still beating fast, not from fear, but from the strange mix of emotions running through her. She had only meant to play a simple tune, just something small to please the travelers who had asked. But the moment she touched the keys, something inside her had opened, something she hadn't touched in years. And now, she felt like she had stepped into a part of herself she had forgotten how to visit. She returned to the counter, was trying to look calm, but the staff member beside her noticed instantly. "You okay?" the woman asked softly. "Yeah," Lena said, though her voice wavered a little. "Just a bit nervous." "Nervous?" "You played beautifully," the woman said with a warm smile. Everyone out there was amazed. Lena ducked her head and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not about something she hadn't practiced in so long. She wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she focused on wiping down a tray, pretending she needed to stay busy. But even as she worked, she could feel the attention still lingering in the lobby. A few guests glanced toward her with curious smiles. The older couple waved kindly before returning to their tea. The group of travelers near the piano spoke quietly, and she could tell they were discussing what she had just played. She couldn't hide the small smile forming on her lips. She felt shy, but at the same time a warm feeling spread through her chest. It had been a long time since she felt something like this, something close to pride. She tried to return to her routine, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. Every time she passed nearby, she felt drawn to it like a quiet pull she couldn't ignore. She reminded herself that she had work to do, that she couldn't simply sit and play whenever she wanted. But still, she felt its presence behind her like a warm light. She wiped a table near the window, keeping her head down. But as she turned around, she saw the tall traveler who had approached her earlier, walking toward her with an easy smile. She straightened her posture and held the tray firmly. "Hey," he said gently. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "No, it's fine," she replied, keeping her tone polite but reserved. "I just wanted to say thank you again," he said. "We really appreciate what you did back there." It made the whole moment feel special. Sincerity caught her off guard. She had expected maybe a quick compliment, but his words carried a weight that felt genuine. "I'm glad you liked it," she said softly. "Liked it?" He laughed lightly. "We loved it. You've got talent. Real talent." She felt her cheeks warming again. "I'm not sure about that. I haven't played in years." "Could have fooled me," he said. "It sounded like you never stopped." She didn't know how to answer that. She simply smiled politely and adjusted the tray in her hands. The man seemed to sense her shyness and stepped back just a little. "We're heading out soon," he continued. "But before we go, we'd love to hear you play again." "Only if you want to, of course." Lena's stomach tightened. She had expected the moment to be over. She had played once, and that should have been enough. She wasn't a musician. She wasn't someone who performed for people. She was just a worker trying to get through her shift. "I don't know," she said gently. I think that was enough for today. He nodded understandingly. Of course. No pressure at all. Before leaving, he added, if you ever decide to take it seriously again, don't hold back. You've got something special. Then he walked away, leaving Lena standing there with a quiet storm inside her. She wished she could ignore his words. She wished she could shake off the strange excitement building in her. But she couldn't. His comment had touched something deep, something hidden beneath years of silence. She went to the back room to return the tray, and once she was alone, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She breathed deeply, trying to calm the fluttering inside her. She told herself that what happened was just a moment, just a few minutes of playing a simple tune. It didn't mean anything. It didn't change anything, but she knew she was lying to herself. It meant everything, because for the first time in a very long time, she had felt alive in a way she hadn't felt since she was younger. She finished her tasks and walked back into the lobby. Most of the group had already left, except for two who were still near the piano, chatting quietly. The older couple was gathering their things, and the staff at the reception desk was busy checking in new guests. Everything looked normal again, but the piano did not feel normal anymore. It felt like an open door she had accidentally walked through as she passed it. The piano's black surface reflected a soft glow of afternoon sunlight. She paused for a second, tempted to sit down again, just to touch the keys. But she forced herself to keep walking. She didn't want to look desperate or seem like she was seeking attention. And besides, she was still working. She moved to the other side of the lobby.
Ow!
And began wiping down the glass display case near the pastry section. But her mind was still tangled with the music she had played. The melody echoed in her head, and the feeling of her fingers gliding over the keys felt fresh, almost too vivid. Her life had been quiet, lately routine, predictable, safe. She didn't have space in her world for dreams anymore. Dreams had become like stories she told herself to fall asleep at night. She tried to forget them in the morning. But today, one of those dreams had quietly stood up again and looked her in the eyes. After a while, the older woman from the window seat approached her. "Dear," the woman said with a warm smile, "I hope you know how gifted you are." Lena felt her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered. "I could feel emotion in the way you played." "Not everyone can do that," the woman continued. "Some people play notes. You played feelings." The words struck deep. Lena didn't think anyone could see through her like that. She had felt exposed while playing. She had convinced herself that no one could truly understand what was happening inside. The woman touched her arm lightly. "Don't let that go again." The man beside her nodded in agreement. "Life is short. Don't lose the things that make your heart rise." Lena swallowed hard. She could only nod. If she tried to speak, her voice might break. They smiled and left the lobby with slow, steady steps. Leaving Lena standing there with her hands slightly trembling, she tried to return to her duties. But her mind refused to settle. She replayed the older woman's words over and over. She replayed the traveler's comment too, and the applause, and the quiet silence before it, and the look on people's faces when she played the first emotional notes. She hadn't felt that kind of connection in years. Hours passed. The busy afternoon gradually faded into a calmer evening. Guests checked into their rooms. Families settled down for dinner. The lobby grew quieter, kind of peaceful quiet that made the piano stand out even more. At one point, Lena found herself walking toward it again. Not deliberately, not consciously. Her body simply moved, as if guided by a memory. When she realized where she was standing, she stopped right beside the bench. The piano keys were still and silent, waiting patiently. The polished surface reflected the soft glow of the ceiling lights. There was no audience now. No one watching. No one expecting anything. She sat down slowly, almost shyly, as if sitting in a place she didn't quite deserve. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She closed her eyes, and the lobby faded behind her. No noise, no pressure. Just her breath and the memory of music. She pressed a key, then another, soft, gentle, familiar. The notes wrapped around her like an old friend, comforting yet emotional. Her shoulders relaxed. Her heartbeat steadied, her mind cleared. She let her hands wander freely, without worrying about mistakes. She wasn't performing, she was remembering. She was talking to herself through sound in the way she used to when she was younger. She played parts of old songs she half remembered, mixing them with small improvisations that felt honest and personal. It felt like coming home. She didn't know how long she played. Minutes, maybe longer. Time didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the soft glow inside her chest. Eventually, she heard a soft voice behind her. "That sounds beautiful." She jumped slightly and turned around. A young woman wearing a hotel uniform, someone from housekeeping, stood nearby with a gentle smile. "Sorry," the woman whispered. "I didn't mean to scare you." "It's okay," Lena said, her voice barely above a breath. "You play." With emotion, the woman said. I could feel it from across the lobby. Lena looked down at the keys. "I'm just remembering things." "Maybe you should remember more often," the woman said kindly. "It suits you." Then she walked away, leaving Lena sitting there with her heart warm and fluttering. She didn't return to playing. Not this time. She stood up and gently closed the piano lid, as if sealing something precious inside. It felt like sealing a promise too. A promise to herself, even if she hadn't spoken it aloud yet. As she walked back to the counter, she realized something important. She wasn't the same person she had been that morning. Something inside her had started moving against something fragile but strong, and she had no idea that this movement, this tiny spark, would soon turn into something far bigger than she imagined. The moment the young worker's fingers began to move with confidence, the entire lobby seemed to shift in mood. What had started as a quiet demonstration, almost like a tiny favor to the guests, suddenly grew into something fuller, richer, and impossible to ignore. A few people who had been walking past slowed down, thinking the hotel had changed the background music. But when they noticed the worker sitting at the piano, their steps paused automatically. The melody had something warm in it, something real, like a story being told without words. The simple tune gradually grew more complex. The notes became brighter, deeper, stronger. And the quiet corner of the lobby turned into a place where everyone suddenly wanted to stand still. It was strange even. The clinking of plates from the restaurant faded a little as if the entire building leaned in to listen. The worker didn't notice any of this. They were too lost in the keys, too wrapped in the feeling of playing again after so many years. It was like their hands remembered everything their mind had forgotten. People started gathering around. Not too close at first. They stood in small groups, whispering things like, "Is this the same server who brought our drinks?" And I didn't know someone here played like that. His phones came out quietly, the little sound of recording buttons clicking one after another. Nobody wanted to interrupt the music, but they also didn't want to miss a moment of it. A few guests from the front desk drifted over, still holding hotel brochures, forgetting about their check-in process for a moment. The businessman who had given the challenge earlier looked stunned. He had expected a basic song, maybe something short and sweet, something anyone could play with a bit of practice. But this was something else entirely. He folded his arms, leaned forward slightly, and followed every movement of the worker's hands with wide eyes. He didn't look embarrassed yet, just surprised, almost confused by what he was witnessing. It was as if the person sitting at the piano had suddenly changed into someone completely different. The worker didn't start the performance with confidence, but now the fear had lifted. Their hands danced effortlessly, moving from one set of keys to another like the music was guiding them, instead of the other way around. Their shoulders relaxed, their breathing deepened, and their face carried a calm focus, almost peaceful. The sound grew louder, not in a harsh way, but in a way that filled every corner of the space. Even guests sitting at the cafe turned their heads, checking if the hotel brought in a professional musician. The workers' co-workers peeked from behind the counter, whispering excitedly. Some of them had never heard the worker play before. They saw them as someone quiet, polite, hard-working, always trying to help guests and do their job. But seeing them at the piano created a new sense of respect, like discovering something hidden under layers of everyday routine. It wasn't just talent. It was heart, effort, emotion, and years of unspoken dreams mixed into the music. The melody rose again as the worker shifted to another section of the piece. The new part sounded like a wave, flowing and rising, then fading into something soft and gentle. A small child sitting with his parents moved closer, mesmerized by the sound. He sat cross-legged near the piano, resting his chin on his hands as if he were watching a magical performance. His parents didn't stop him. They were too busy recording the moment. A couple who had been arguing quietly at a nearby table forgot their disagreement for a moment. Their fight dissolved as they watched the worker play, their expressions softening. The music had that effect. It didn't ask anything of people. It just invited them to listen. More guests entered from the elevator, hearing the faint notes echo into the hallway. They followed the sound almost instinctively, curious. The pianist wasn't aware of how many people now stood behind them. A full semicircle of hotel guests surrounded the area, their eyes fixed on the performance. Some stood with folded arms, some with hands over their hearts, and others with quiet smiles as if they had stumbled onto something beautiful without expecting it. Even the hotel manager walked out, adjusting his tie, looking confused about the sudden gathering. But when he saw the worker at the piano and heard the music, his expression changed from confusion to surprised admiration. He didn't say anything. He simply blended into the crowd and listened like everyone else. The light above the piano cast a soft glow over the worker's hands, making the moment feel even more special. The lobby's tall windows let in the late afternoon sun, which reflected faintly on the glossy surface of the piano. It was almost cinematic, like a scene from a heartfelt movie where an ordinary person suddenly shows a skill no one expected. As the melody climbed higher, the crowd reacted softly. People whispered, "Wow," under their breath. A few exchanged amazed glances, some even shaking their heads in disbelief. Others pressed a hand to their chest, feeling an emotion they couldn't quite explain. There was something deeply comforting about the performance, something pure and genuine. The worker wasn't thinking about the crowd or the businessman or the challenge that started this moment. They were thinking about the feeling of playing again, the sense of connection between their heart and their hands. They remembered the times they played as a child, when life felt lighter and dreams seemed closer. They remembered how they used to wake up early just to practice before school, and how the piano had been a place where everything else faded away. Now, sitting in the hotel lobby, those memories returned in waves, guiding the rhythm and emotion of the music. Their eyes closed for a moment, letting their fingers carry the weight of years. The sound softened, turning into something delicate, like a whisper. People leaned in, not wanting to miss even a single note. Then, the worker slowly brought the piece into a new section, something powerful, something bright. The change in energy made the crowd straighten up, as if the room had taken a deep breath. It was the kind of transition that professionals usually did, but the worker played it naturally, effortlessly, as if it belonged to them. The businessman lowered his head slightly, trying to hide the shocked smile forming on his lips. He whispered to the person next to him, "I had no idea." The person next to him nodded without taking their eyes off the piano. More employees arrived, gathering at the edge of the crowd. Some held trays, some still wore gloves from the kitchen, and some had name tags shining under the lobby lights. They stood together, watching the coworker they thought they knew. Realizing there was so much more to them, one of the housekeepers clapped her hands quietly in excitement, even though the piece wasn't over yet. Another worker whispered they should be on a stage somewhere, not serving coffee. The manager overheard but didn't correct her. He seemed to agree. The melody climbed again, this time blending joy and confidence in each movement. The sound echoed beautifully through the room, bouncing lightly off the marble floors and tall walls. Guests who had been heading out stopped near the exit. Some even returned, pulled back by curiosity. The worker didn't open their eyes. They were too deep in the music now, feeling every part of it. Their shoulders moved gently with the rhythm, their fingers traveling across the keys like they belonged there. It didn't feel like a performance for the crowd. It felt like a return home. It's like meeting a piece of themselves they had lost for too long. People watched the transformation happening in front of them. The shy worker who hesitated earlier now looked like someone who had performed their whole life. They didn't seem scared anymore. They seemed complete. The music grew louder near the final part, building into something bold and emotional. The crowd sensed the ending approaching and held their breath unconsciously. The worker took a small pause, letting the air settle, then launched into the final run of notes with a mix of strength and grace that made the entire lobby feel alive the last few seconds of the piece carried so much emotion that even the people far in the back grew silent. The final note came gently, almost like a sigh. It faded slowly, leaving behind a warm echo that lingered in the air for a moment, then complete stillness. For 1 second, maybe 2, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the room didn't remember how to react. And then the applause began soft at first, then louder, then overwhelming. The room erupted with cheering and clapping and excited voices. People smiled. Some laughed happily. Others lifted their phones higher, still recording. The child sitting near the piano jumped to his feet, clapping hard with both hands. The businessman clapped the loudest, his earlier confidence replaced by genuine respect. The hotel manager straightened his tie again, looking proud even though he hadn't done anything. The worker finally opened their eyes, surprised by the huge crowd in front of them. They looked overwhelmed, almost unsure how to react. Their face softened into a shy, grateful smile as the applause continued. They nodded slightly, thanking everyone without speaking. The lobby no longer felt like a normal place. It felt like a small concert hall where something magical had just happened, something no one had expected, something that would be remembered long after the sound faded. And for the first time in a long time, the worker felt something warm rising inside them. It wasn't fear or pressure or doubt. It was hope. After the final note faded and the applause slowly settled, the worker sat quietly on the piano bench, still trying to understand what had just happened. Their hands rested on their knees, slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the rush of emotion that came with remembering a part of themselves they thought they had lost forever. People were still talking excitedly around them, some replaying the videos on their phones, others telling their friends what they had witnessed. The lobby felt alive in a new way, filled with warmth and admiration. The worker took a slow breath, trying to ground themselves. They had never expected anything like this. What started as a simple challenge had turned into something unforgettable, not just for the crowd, but for themselves. For years, they had moved through life quietly, doing their job, paying bills, taking care of responsibilities, and trying not to think about the dreams they had once held close. Music used to be everything to them, but life had forced them to push it aside. Now, here, they were sitting at a piano again, realizing that the spark they thought had died was still burning, just waiting for the right moment to show itself. The businessman stepped forward first. He looked almost sheepish as he approached, rubbing the back of his neck like he was unsure how to start the conversation. When the worker looked up at him, he gave a small smile, the kind people make when they feel both impressed and slightly embarrassed. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "I had no idea you could play like that. I think everyone here is blown away." The workers shook their head gently, trying to downplay the praise. But the businessman held up a hand, stopping them. "No, really," he continued. "That wasn't just good. That was, well, it was something special. I don't say that lightly." A few people nearby nodded in agreement. The worker felt their cheeks warm, unsure how to react to such honest compliments. They were used to staying in the background, doing their job and blending in with the rest of the staff. Being the center of attention felt strange, almost unreal. The businessman then leaned a little closer and lowered his voice, as if he wanted to speak more privately. "Listen," he said, "I know someone in the local music scene. A friend of mine. He works with new talent. He'd want to hear you play. If you're interested, I can help you get in touch." The worker blinked, stunned. For a moment, they didn't speak at all. They weren't used to doors opening so suddenly, especially doors they hadn't dared to knock on in years. The businessman must have sensed their hesitation, so he added, "No pressure. I'm just offering, you have something rare. People should hear it." The worker thanked him softly, their voice barely audible over the chatter in the lobby. They promised they would think about it, and they meant it. When the businessman stepped aside, the guests flooded in. People from all around the lobby came one by one to congratulate the worker, some sharing kind words, others telling them how moved they felt. A few said the performance made their day. Some even said it reminded them of someone they once loved who played piano too. The worker listened to each person, offering small smiles and quiet thank yous. Among the crowd, the small child who had sat near the piano ran up with excitement glowing on his face. "You played so fast," he said with bright eyes. "I want to learn to play like that one day." The worker laughed softly, touched by the child's enthusiasm. They bent down a little and told him that he absolutely could learn, and that all it took was practice and patience. The child nodded seriously, as if committing the advice to memory, before his parents gently guided him back. Slowly, the crowd grew thinner. Guests returned to their rooms or meals, their conversations still buzzing with talk of the unexpected performance. The workers' co-workers gathered around too, offering their own reactions. Some teased gently in a friendly way, asking why the worker had been hiding such talent. Others were genuinely amazed, expressing how proud they felt to work alongside someone so skilled. One coworker lightly tapped the worker's arm and said with a grin, "Tomorrow, everyone will be talking about you. You know that, right?" The worker shook their head and laughed shyly, already feeling overwhelmed by the attention. But deep down, they felt something warm, a kind of happiness that had been missing from their life for a long time. The hotel manager came over last. He wasn't the type to show emotion easily, but even he couldn't hide the slight smile on his face. He adjusted his tie out of habit before speaking. "That was remarkable," he said simply. "Thank you for sharing that with everyone." The worker nodded, not sure what to say. Then the manager continued, "I know your shift is almost done. Why don't you take a little break before you get back to work? You deserve it." The worker thanked him, grateful for the small kindness. They stepped away from the piano, feeling the lingering warmth of applause still in their chest. As they walked back to the staff area, their mind felt lighter than it had in years. But even after they returned to their tasks, the memory of the performance didn't leave them. Every time they passed through the lobby, someone recognized them and waved. Some guests asked if they would play again later. Others simply smiled at them, the way people smile at someone they feel proud of. After their shift ended, the worker walked home slowly, letting the evening air cool their thoughts. The streets were quiet, lit by soft orange lights that reflected on the pavement. With every step, they replayed the moment at the piano, the touch of the keys, the sound of the chords, the silence before the applause, and the roar that followed. It stayed with them like a living memory, warm and vivid. At home, they sat near the window with a cup of tea. Staring out at the dim lights of the city, they could still feel the way their fingers moved across the keys, the way their heart beat with every shift in the melody. They hadn't felt that alive in years. Music had been more than a hobby. It had been a piece of their identity. And now it had resurfaced in the most unexpected way. For a long time, they had convinced themselves that life needed to be practical, that dreams were only dreams. They had accepted that responsibilities came first, and passion could wait. But now, something inside them had changed. It wasn't reckless or unrealistic. It was simply honest. They missed music. Truly missed it. And maybe, just maybe, there was still room in their life to follow the dream they once had. They thought about the businessman's offer, about the possibility of meeting someone who worked with musicians. It felt strange, almost unreal, but it also felt exciting. A gentle excitement, not the kind that overwhelms, but the kind that encourages. They looked down at their hands, same hands that had carried trays and wiped tables day after day. But tonight, those hands had reminded them of the talent that had never really gone away. Maybe it was time to see where that talent could take them. The next morning, things felt different at the hotel. People whispered kindly as the worker passed. Some staff members nudged each other with playful smiles. A few guests approached them again, wanting to know if they would play that evening. The worker felt shy, but grateful, surprised at how many people were still talking about last night. And then something unexpected happened. A video from the lobby had been posted online by one of the guests. Within hours, it had spread quickly. The comments were filled with amazement. People talked about how moving the performance was, how surprising it felt to see a hotel server play like a trained pianist, and how the moment had made them smile. The worker's phone buzzed with messages from old friends and family who had seen the video. Some were shocked. Some were proud. Some simply said, "I always knew you had this in you." By the end of the day, the video had thousands of views. By the next morning, it had more. The businessman kept his promise. He returned to the hotel and gave the worker the contact information of his friend, explaining that the friend had already seen the video and was eager to meet. "Only if you want to," the businessman said again, giving the worker full freedom to choose. The worker held the small piece of paper gently, feeling its weight despite how light it was. This wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a shortcut. It wasn't overnight fame. It was an opportunity. A real one. Something they hadn't expected. Something they hadn't even dared to hope for. That night, the worker sat at the piano again, not for a crowd, not for applause, but for themselves. The lobby was quieter, and only a few people stood around listening softly. The music came out gentle this time, peaceful, like a personal conversation between the worker and the keys. And as they played, they realized something important. The dream they thought was gone had never disappeared. It had only been waiting patiently, quietly until they were ready to pick it up again. The simple challenge that had started as a small moment in an ordinary day had turned into a turning point. Not dramatic, not sudden, but powerful in a quiet, meaningful way. As the final note lingered in the air, the worker lifted their hands slowly and smiled to themselves. Life wasn't suddenly perfect. The future wasn't magically guaranteed, but for the first time in a long time, it felt open, filled with possibility, and that was enough.